So God's grace is receiving what you don't deserve. So like we're receiving salvation. That's an example. And then God's mercy is not receiving what you deserve. So we deserve punishment, but we don't receive that when we receive his mercy.
So if you got pulled over, like it would be, the officer would be merciful if he didn't give you a speeding ticket. Is that what I'm hearing? Because you deserve the speeding ticket.
There you go.
And then I think in the same analogy, grace is like, maybe he gave you the ticket, but then the officer's the one that pays the ticket instead of you. I think it's how the analogy goes.
There you go. Somebody else pays the ticket.
Or like the judge pays, I don't know, someone.
Yeah, someone pays the ticket, but you're not paying the ticket.
Yes.
That's a good example.
But you still receive the ticket.
See, you did relate it to speeding somehow.
Yeah.
Very good work.
Yeah.
Shout out to Aaron's brain for working on this episode.
For example, yesterday I was
Shout out Matcha for helping
I was
my brain.
I was in the sheriff's police car.
Oh, do
and
explain.
the dude ran a red light.
The cop or you?
No.
Why were you in the cop car? Please give context.
I can't. Anyways, I was in the front seat.
But
I was in the front seat.
Okay.
I was in the front seat. Everything was good. And a dude ran a red light in front of the cop. And he just was like, whoop,
and he threw out his speed strips.
And so the police officer, instead of pulling him over, I was like, pull him over. He's all like,
you're the worst. You're a snitch.
He's all like, nah, I'm just, the police officer was being merciful because he's just all like, hey, you just let him go. So, yeah.
Crazy.
We were talking about speeding tickets, so I just want to, sneak that story in there.
Your speeding story.
My speeding story.
Do you have a story like that?
3 circles.
3 circles.
So like taking mercy and keep going, but taking mercy and grace, the comparison, or maybe I can like the distinction of the two in the context of justice. Like, what does that look like with sin? Like when sin enters the equation, how does like just relate it back to this?
Yeah. I think that's where like I would transition more into like God's justice. Kind of what I mentioned about him not leaving sin unpunished. Like God is also perfectly just. So while he's merciful and he's gracious, he's also perfectly just. And so because he's perfectly just, like we have all fallen short of his glory, which sounds like that's something you've already talked about.
Last episode.
Yeah, so we've all fallen short.
That button in the corner if you're on YouTube to stream it.
Yeah, we've all fallen short, and so that means that like God's justice, like we're separated from God, because he is perfectly just. But thankfully, like there is hope, which we'll get to towards the end of this podcast. And so like God gives us his mercy, and so I think Romans 8 verse 1 is a good like summary of kind of how that looks, like just that there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ. And so God's gracious, he's merciful, he's one who's just and will punish sin, but for those who are in Christ, like there is like this hope that we have that we'll get to. So yeah, I
like this question. Do you think it's a good thing that God doesn't turn a blind eye towards sin, even though that includes our own sin? And along with that, if God just let sin slide, what would that say about his character? So kind of digging into like why.
Yeah.
I also have a commentary, little note on this too.
Let's get into it.
Do you want it now or after the question?
You can go. Yeah.
Just as you were talking, I forgot I made this little note, but it made sense. In the Asbury Bible commentary, this is just a direct quote. I'm just going to rip it. But it was good language, I thought. I think that goes with what you're saying too. Or whoever wrote it, I don't know the author, but he said compassion, or she. Thanks. Compassion is not the dissolution of moral cause and effect. Unless there are real consequences for guilt, there's no such thing as mercy. Dope. And that points like a little bit of hope, like you just referenced. However, it should not be thought that God arbitrarily punishes the descendants of sinners. Again, removes like his like the misconception of like cruelty and all that, which is dope. The statement means that a person's actions have long-term consequences because God has made the world that way. God's mercy is in his limiting the deadly effects of sin to 3 or 4 generations. The effects of righteousness he extends to 1,000 generations. And it references like Deuteronomy 7:9 for that last sentence. And that one,
that's cool.
The verse is, know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love. Back to love. It's dope. 2,000 generations, and to those who love him and keep his commandments. Sick.